Okay, let's begin. Welcome everybody to the webinar, How to Achieve Easy and Efficient Microsoft 365 Governance. Before we get going, just a couple of things I'd like to point out. The webinar will be recorded for your future reference, or if you want to share it, or for those of you that couldn't make it to the webinar, to view it, of course, at a later stage. And you will have access to the slides as well. There is a Q&A function at the top as well, which you should feel free to use throughout the webinar. We will be answering your questions as we go along, or if not, at the end of the webinar. But please use the Q&A for questions as opposed to the chat function. So let's get started with the brief introductions. So my name is Charles Collins Hooper, and I'm the Partner and Alliance Manager here at Rancor. And it's an absolute pleasure to have our partner here, who is from Yoko 10, Alex Eggar, and I'll pass it over to Alex to give a quick introduction of who he is and what he does.
Thanks, Charles. Hi everyone, my name is Alex Eggar. So I'm the founder and modern workplace consultant at Yoko 10. I started out as a SharePoint consultant back in 2005, and I've been working with Microsoft collaboration and productivity solutions ever since then. I currently work pretty much exclusively with Microsoft 365 and Azure, delivering modern workplace solutions for organizations across the UK and beyond.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Alex. And also joining us today, it's a delight to have Greg Bowles, one of Yoko 10's clients from the Specialist Risk Group. And I'll hand it over to Greg to just tell us a little bit about what you do at SRG.
Thanks, Charles. Welcome, everyone. I am Greg Bowles. I am the infrastructure team leader over at Specialist Risk Group. We look after the group on the wider group for anything in regards to infrastructure and support, away from application support. Thank you.
All right, fantastic, Greg. And now, just to kick off for the webinar, just a quick introduction of Rancor for those of you that may be joining us and you're not too familiar who Rancor is. So Rancor is basically a B2B software company. We provide award-winning solutions which are essential for organizations to stay in control of Microsoft Office 365, SharePoint, Teams, Azure, and Power Platform. So basically what it is we do is we empower organizations to identify, manage, and mitigate the risks of uncontrolled platform growth, as well as unmonitored customizations by providing the invaluable insights, advice, and tools basically to scale your operations through automations. And now to set the stage of the Specialist Risk Group, I'll be handing it back over to Greg.
Thanks, Charles, and welcome to Specialist Risk Group. We are a specialist insurance broker based in the UK and Ireland. The clue is in the name specialist. We do specialist insurance from jewelers to trade credit to equestrian insurance and so on. The company has been on a huge M&A trail over the last 2 years, acquiring specialist businesses, enabling us to offer a wider variety of products to our clients. This has caused us to grow from 180 members of staff when I first joined in April 2019 to now just shy of 450 members of staff. Working alongside Yoko 10 and Alex, they've helped us in moving into Exchange Online, deploying a company intranet, and our most recent project of rolling out Teams and OneDrive across the business. That leads me on quite nicely to handing over to Alex to introduce Yoko 10.
Thanks, Greg. So Yoko 10 are an organization who provide consultancy services pretty much for all aspects of Microsoft 365 and SharePoint. We do have a particular focus on intranet solutions and also the planning, governance and adoption of Microsoft 365 collaboration services. Our consultants have a long background in delivering SharePoint solutions and therefore also have a long background and a lot of experience in governance. If you've ever deployed SharePoint or been involved in a SharePoint project, you'll know that governance and SharePoint do go hand in hand. We've worked with Rancor previously using their other products when we've been working on some of the more complex and highly customized SharePoint migrations. Because of that relationship, we were invited to join the preview program for Rancor Governance in August last year. So we attended some meetings and we had some demonstrations of the product, and we could very quickly see the benefits they would bring, and also the gaps in the existing Microsoft 365 reporting and auditing that Rencore governance product would fill. So we then decided to onboard a couple of customers, one of those customers being Specialist Risk Group. This is when the product became available publicly. So as Greg previously mentioned, we started working with Specialist Risk Group when they first moved to Microsoft 365, which is a little while ago now. And the early stages of that engagement were focused on the strategy and governance planning for deploying all the various services in Microsoft 365. And that was really to ensure there was a consistency in how the various tools in Microsoft 365 were used and administered, and also to make sure that there was clear messaging for the business around how those tools should be used. And really, that was why they were an obvious choice to use Rencore when the rollout of those services started to increase. Now, for the remainder of this webinar, what we're going to aim to do is provide an overview of how Yoko 10 and SRG work together to define that governance for Microsoft 365, and then how Rencore was used to proactively monitor those governance decisions, and also support the ongoing administration of SRG's Microsoft 365 environment. So for us, governance really is something that underpins every successful Microsoft 365 deployment. Those upfront governance discussions and then those subsequent decisions, they define the configuration, the training and the communications associated with the rollout of Microsoft 365. And those governance decisions also touch on almost all the aspects of Microsoft 365, including security and permissions, the information lifecycle, the usability of the solution, ultimately the adoption of the solution, and also the administration and ongoing management. I mean, if you think about Teams as one example, you're going to be thinking about things like, will Teams be created by default as public or private? Will we allow guest access to Teams? Will we apply expiration policies to help with the overall lifecycle management of Teams? Will we restrict channel creation to team owners or let members do that as well? So there's a whole host of these decisions that need to be made, and they really need to be made upfront before the actual deployment starts. It doesn't always happen. I appreciate it's that's a bit of an ideal view, but yeah, absolutely fundamental to the success of the project. Another key aspect of governance for us is really the what to use when and what goes where. So there needs to be clear policies and guidelines outlining the use cases for each of the Microsoft 365 services, and also the type of content or data that should or can be stored in each of those. So these are the things that we work with Specialist Risk Group with earlier on in the engagement to define that strategy and that governance plan. Now, Rencore governance didn't drive those decisions. These were before Rencore governance came along. But what Rencore governance did do was provide an easy and effective way to monitor the compliance of those governance decisions once they had been made. So so we'd already completed that work with SRG, and there were a few factors that made the timing right, or certainly made the timing feel right, for them to look at onboarding with the Rencore governance tool. And Greg's going to talk a little bit about those considerations now.
Perfect, thanks, Alex. Although Teams has been used for messaging and meetings, there has been a recent strategic move for Teams. There's been a recent strategic move to use Teams for file management and collaboration. This included a move to OneDrive for business, for personal file storage, which has resulted in increased usage of Microsoft 365, and also an increase in the level of corporate data stored in Microsoft 365. Employees have also been given access to Power Automate and Power Apps, with some instances being used to manage core business processes. It is key that these stay active, and also important that IT have sight of what employees are creating. As the various Microsoft 365 services are adopted in SRG, we need to ensure that they are used correctly, as agreed strategically and as defined by governance, and effectively avoiding sprawl and promoting good lifecycle management. There are a relatively large number of disabled accounts linked to the onboarding process for new acquisitions. There are also disabled accounts linked to leavers. We need to be able to differentiate between these and ensure they are being managed through their life cycle effectively, for example, allocating and deallocating licenses and managing access and group membership. As with all organizations, SRG want to use every option available to ensure data held in Microsoft 365 is secure and the risk of unauthorized access is minimized where possible. Most, if not all, this information is available in one of the Microsoft 365 admin centers, but there's no way to view it in one place in a simple contextual way. And that's where Rencore really seems to excel. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Greg. Right, so if we have a look at the approach we took to actually deploying Rencore governance within SRG, we followed a fairly simple process, really. And we started off with a demo of Rencore governance to the key stakeholders in SRG. And that started off with reviewing the information that was being gathered by the tool when it was scanning the environment, then the ways in which that data could be queried using what are called checks. So sort of the rules that we can set up to pick up different instances or different types of activity in the tenant. And then how we could use the information from those checks to create dashboards and tiles and create reports. So we will actually look at some of those components shortly when we do a demo. So I'll explain more about checks, tiles, and dashboards then. So after we looked at the functionality and we had reviewed some of the potential use cases, we decided to go about deploying it really across 3 different stages. So the first stage was to look at the broader or general Microsoft 365 governance. So I guess really think about it sort of tenant-wide. So rather than focusing on individual services like Teams or OneDrive or SharePoint, we were looking at things like managing identities, managing licenses, managing security. So the aim was to bring that information, with that audit and inventory type information together into one place, and then provide some clear and easy to read metrics and potentially flag any potential concerns or issues within those dashboards. Once those dashboards were complete and live and in use, we then moved on to focusing on the specific services. So, looking at some of the governance decisions around Teams, around SharePoint, around Power Automate, around Power Apps, etc. And then create a similar set of dashboards, but focusing in on the governance decisions associated specifically with those services. The final stage was to kind of review the automation capabilities of Rencore governance, and then just try and see if for any of the, I guess, critical or key checks that we had created already, could we add some sort of automation to those? Now that might be to manage an outcome. So if something happens, then automatically do this, or simply just to send some sort of message or alert to let somebody know within SRG that there had been new activity, and that would save them having to go to the dashboard or browse the dashboard, to notice that. So those are the 3 steps that we took, and I'm going to go through a little. I'm going to go through each of those in a little bit more detail now. Okay, so the first stage was to create several dashboards to address that broader, wider governance of the Microsoft 365 environment. Now, before I go into the detail around that, I think Greg's just going to talk a little bit about a few of the considerations which actually help define which dashboards would be created and what they would show.
Sure. So when we were working with Yoko 10, we had many considerations and priorities to ensure we were covering when looking how best to utilize Rencore. Touching on a couple of the items on the screen, keeping an eye on what guest accounts we have and where they are being used is vitally important for us. Being a company heavily involved in mergers and acquisitions, part of our integration process is to invite the staff as guests until we have fully integrated the business into the wider group. It's important that we are cleaning these up along the way, as this can cause sync issues in Azure AD and Office 365. Keeping an eye on leaving accounts or leavers accounts. I mean, we all know that's hugely important for any business, but it's always good to know that the leaver procedures are working, and it also allows us to adapt and learn from any mistakes or anything that's been missed previously. And lastly, are employees making effective use of the available services has come in very handy with the recent deployment of Teams and OneDrive to the business, helping us to learn if anyone is resistant to the new products, and also if anyone could do with any further training on the systems. I will hand over to Alex to give a background about the dashboards.
Thank you. Okay, so the outcome of all of that, those conversations and looking at the capabilities that we had available in Raincore Governance, we ended up creating 6 dashboards for that initial stage. We've got them on the screen here. I'll just talk a little bit about each of them, and then I will actually go into a little bit more detail for a few of them, so you can actually see what's going on with them. So first of all, we have adoption. So this dashboard was all about whether employees were using the Microsoft 365 services that were available to them. So were they logging in? Were active accounts actually logging in and being used? Were employees using the services that were available? Were they being included in groups, in teams, etc.? So were people actually partaking and using the services like we intended them to? The next dashboard, the declutter dashboard, this was about looking for content repositories. By that I mean like Teams, SharePoint sites, OneDrive sites, and looking for any that either haven't ever been used or perhaps were used but are no longer used. So this is looking for areas where we can potentially archive or delete, trying to keep on top or prevent that sprawl that you can sometimes see in an environment. The same went for things like Power Apps and flows that might have been created. So it wasn't just about the file storage, it was also about instances of Power Apps and flow that may no longer be required. We then have external access. So this was looking at how many guest accounts there are in the tenant. And of those guest accounts, what do they actually have access to? Also, what files do we have? Which areas in Microsoft 365 are sharing files externally, and where specifically are they being shared from? Now, there's not necessarily a problem with sharing files externally. There certainly wasn't a governance decision to stop that. But it does provide a quick way to drill down if you do need to just do a bit of a spot check and see exactly where that sharing is taking place, and even right down to which files are being shared if you need to. We then have the identity and information protection. So we're looking here at, well, one of the key things here is looking for active accounts which don't have an enterprise mobility and security license. Because if an account has been created and it doesn't have that license assigned, it's potentially, well, it's not got that extra security wrapper which SRG require to both protect the identity and then protect the data on devices, both corporate and BYOD that they might be using. The other thing is on that dashboard is whether anonymous sharing is being used. That could potentially lead to some level of data breach. So are there sites or teams or OneDrives where anonymous sharing is enabled? And if so, which files are being shared anonymously? Next one, licensing, fairly straightforward. So this is all about which licenses have we allocated, which licenses do we have available, and also which license SKUs are very low on licenses and therefore potentially need to have some more ordered. And finally, we have the offboarding dashboard. Now, this is really all about disabled accounts. Excuse me. So SRG can come here and view how many disabled accounts are in the tenant, what do those accounts have access to, and what resources are those accounts consuming. So these are the 6 dashboards we decided to set up initially, yeah, these were deployed in that first stage. Now, I am just going to focus in on 3 of those now, just to give you a little bit more detail. Before I do that, I will give you just a quick overview of I guess, how a dashboard is constructed, because I've used some of this terminology, so it might just help. So when we create a dashboard, we have the dashboard itself, as indicated there. And then on the dashboard, we can have 1 or more tiles. Now, this declutter dashboard is very simple. It has a single tile, but we can add as many tiles as we want to that dashboard. Within the tile, the way we've set this up, we have a number of checks. Now, the checks, they're kind of fundamental to how everything works really in Raincore Governance. And the check is really a policy or a rule that we build that dictates what we want to look for in the Microsoft 365 environment. So an example might be find me all teams with external sharing enabled. Or for example, the one that's highlighted here with that little arrow, well, it's not an arrow, the line, stopped flows. That simply scans the Power Automate environments and looks for any flows in a stopped state. You can create very complex checks with all different conditions, but yeah, they kind of underpin how most of the functionality will work in Core Governance. So moving on to the dashboard itself. So to start with here, we've got some checks in here which look for the items or repositories which have been created but no longer have any activity. So either they've been created and never used, or they were used but they're not used anymore. So here we're thinking about, can they be deleted? Can they be archived? You know, do we need to have these items within the environment? Of course, anything you've got in there that you don't need is just additional administration and potentially data or security issues as well. Next, we've got teams with few files or teams with no files. So if we've got people creating teams and they're not storing files in there, or they're storing very few files in there, yes, they may be there for a good reason, absolutely, no doubt about that. But also people might be creating these teams and really not using them efficiently. They might be creating teams just to use for chat. Well, is that the best use of a team? Are there better alternatives available? So by flagging these within the dashboard, it allows Greg and his team to potentially contact the team's owners, have a chat with them and see if they are actually using the tools the correct way and if a better alternative can be offered. Finally, we've got teams with very few members, very much the same. You know, if I create a team and I've got 2 or less members in it, do I really need a team? Is it the right tool for the job? And this can flag that and allow me to follow up. One of the things that I've not shown you here, but I will show you in the demo, is that for all of these checks that you can see on the screen, I can click on those and get into the and view details about every instance that's been found. So if I clicked on stop flows, for example, I would see a list of all the flows which were in a stop state, and then I can further dig down into each of those to view very detailed information about each flow. So there's a whole raft of information available behind these dashboards that I can click through to and view. I will show you that in the demonstration. Okay, next dashboard is external access. A bit more to this dashboard. You can see we've used 4 tiles here. First tile just gives me an all-up view of our guest accounts. So I can click through that blurred out number there. I can click through and just view all the guest accounts and the information associated with them. I have a tile here which actually looks for all the groups. That's all the different types of groups in Microsoft 365 and shows me the ones with external users. And the same for teams as well. So where are my teams where I've got guest accounts added? Down here, we're looking at external file sharing. So for OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint, where are all of the instances where we've got external files shared? And last tile here, this is actually providing a breakdown of groups. So for Microsoft 365 groups, for security groups, and distribution groups, where are my guest members? Last one is the offboarding. As mentioned before, this is kind of all about the disabled user accounts. So the first tile on here, again, slightly different layout. So these are using white tiles, so we can actually see more of the text that's on the tiles. So the top tile is more of an overview. So for disabled accounts, are there any with owner or admin roles in the environment? Are there any disabled accounts which have licenses assigned? Could be costing us money that we don't necessarily need to be spending. Next tile down, we come to the groups with disabled accounts. So it's similar to the last tile. I've got a breakdown of groups by type, Microsoft 365, security and distribution, and whether they have any disabled accounts in there. So we can complete a bit of a tidy up exercise in there if required. Now, what you can't see on here, there is actually a third tile there, which isn't on the screen, and that lists all the Microsoft 365 services, Teams, SharePoint, Power Apps, Power Automate, and whether or not they have guest accounts assigned as member or members or others as well. So that gives us like a nice all-up view in that dashboard of how many disabled accounts there are, what roles they have, and where they're being used. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick demonstration now just to show you how those dashboards were created. It shouldn't take long. You'll probably see as we go through it, it's not a particularly complex process. famous last words, probably. Let's go. So I'm in a demo environment here. But to start with, so I've got a default dashboard that I'll always land on. This is kind of my home dashboard, I guess. So from here, I can simply add a new dashboard from here. I can pick a template or I can start from scratch. Let's go with that blank dashboard. I'm not going to bother with the description. So I now have my blank dashboard. Now I have a couple of options here. First is to add a tile that already exists. Okay, so let's say that on there, I know that I've got all of these built-in tiles that already exist. So I want to add one for my external users. So I'll drop that on to the dashboard, come back around. So now I've come down to my list of dashboards here. I have external access here. So now I've got my dashboard with one pre-built tile on there because I picked that from the tile library that already exists. Now, that's probably not going to be sufficient for you. You're going to want to put some of your own checks and tiles on there. So I'll just show you that now. So as mentioned before, a check is like a rule, a set of rules, or a policy that defines what you're trying to identify in the Microsoft 365 environment. So let's create a new check-in here for groups with external file sharing. So I come to the checks section. I just simply, you can see I've got loads of checks here that I can reuse, or I can add a new check. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a check. Okay. So you see here, this is where I start to build up my query or my rules. So every Microsoft 365 group has its files stored in a SharePoint site. So I'm going to come down here and look for a violation for every SharePoint site collection. I'm going to put a filter on that though, because I need to make sure it's group connected. So I come down here to my filter conditions. Is group connected? Yes. Okay. So this straight away lets me report on every Microsoft 365 group that I'm after. There are different ways to get to the groups. You know, there is more than one way to do it in here, but this gives me my starting point. And now I can come down here and add a related object. Now that related object is going to be any SharePoint file sharing there, and we'll pop another filter in because we want specifically to report on external. So any SharePoint file sharing where is external is true. That now lets me identify all the groups where that is true. I can preview it from down here just to make sure I'm getting some results back. I am. And I mentioned to you previously about how you can drill through, you can use the tiles to actually drill down and look at the instances that have been found. So you can see here, that check has found 2 groups with external sharing. If I come in here and extend that, I can actually see the files as well, which are being shared externally. Different checks will give you different levels of information, but yeah, it does allow you to drill down and get all of that detailed information that you might need. Close that off. Next. So I'll give that a name. Not going to bother with description, but I can say, right, I'm going to say that's a security category, and I don't really want to give it a severity, so I'm just going to say it's for information, and I'm going to change the icon, Microsoft 365, and save that. Okay. I won't wait for that to finish. I'll just jump back to the dashboard. Now I've got my check created. I can come back to my dashboard and add that tile. So let's say, let's try again. Let's say, external access. Right. So let's add another tile here. We're going to add a custom tile this time rather than picking one that already exists. We're going to go simple. You can do advanced tiles that provide graphical outputs for the check information, but we'll just keep it simple. We're going to build our tile based on checks, and we're going to call it file sharing. I say I want to have a list view, and then I just pick the checks that I want to show. Let me just drop that down. So I'm going to say I want to see groups with external file sharing, teams with external file sharing, and SharePoint sites with external file sharing. And there you go. I can see my tile now at the side. That's me pick 3 checks that I want to use on there. Simply save that. And there we go. I now have my dashboard with 2 tiles. And then it's just a case of repeating that. So you go through, you build your checks that you need, you build your tiles based on those checks, and you add them to the correct dashboards. So hopefully that gives you a very quick but a good idea of how you can go about building these dashboards in RenCo governance. Okay, moving on. Next, we're going to have a quick look at the second stage we went through, which was actually setting up the governance for individual services. So after we complete those general sort of wider tenant-wide dashboards, we start to look at Teams, OneDrive, Power Automate, Power Apps, and what decisions have been made in respect to governance of those. So we went back to the governance plan that had been written some time ago, just to see what decisions had already been made around governance. We then reviewed that documentation or those decisions against some of the anything that might have come up as the new services had actually been started to roll out. So have we spotted anything new or different doing to make any changes? That then allowed us to look at those governance decisions against the capabilities of RenCo and the data that was available in RenCo governance, and then build the dashboards out that we needed. I think Greg's just gonna mention a little bit about some of those governance decisions that the SRG had made in respect to the individual services.
Perfect, thanks Alex. Yeah, so Yoko 10 and SRG discussed best practice and other considerations related to the rollout and adoption of the Microsoft 365 services. This resulted in a number of key governance decisions for Teams, OneDrive, Power Platform, etc. And a few of which are highlighted here. Private channels. Use of private channels is fine, but when there are too many private channels within a team, multiple teams may be a better solution, or the owner may not understand other options available. Managing permissions correctly across many private channels is not only time consuming, it also introduces the risk of incorrect permissions and data breaches. Employees with a large number of OneDrive files or sharing a large number of files from OneDrive itself may indicate they're storing files in OneDrive which may be better stored within a team. All SRG employees have an EMS E5 license assigned. This provides additional protection for their identity and also when accessing data on personal and corporate devices. Identifying any account where this is not the case reduces the potential for any malicious access. I'll hand back to Alex to explain the Microsoft 365 Services dashboard.
Thank you, Greg. So this is what we ended up with. So we proceeded actually to create a single dashboard to cover the Microsoft 365 services. Now that included a separate tile for each of the services. We did have another option, which would have been to create a dashboard for each of the services. So a separate dashboard for Teams, separate dashboard for OneDrive, etc. But because the sort of historical, that trend information wasn't that important at the moment, we felt the priority actually was just sort of ease of access to the information and being able to digest it in a more simple way, which is why we opted just to actually put all the information on individual tiles within a single dashboard. Because the checks are already created, the sort of groundwork's already been done, it'll be very easy for us to move to separate dashboards if we want to longer term. But for now, this just seemed to be the right solution. So you can see here, following on from some of Greg's point about the some of the decisions that have been made within SRG around Teams governance. Here we're monitoring teams with very few owners, so we need to make sure that they've got 2 or more. Oh, sorry, 2, really no more. Teams without owners, teams where there are many private channels. So if a team has 3 or more private channels, that should start to raise some sort of flag. Do we need to start speaking to that team's owner and see if they need multiple teams, or perhaps, you know, they're getting a bit crazy with the private channels and don't understand the administration overhead to go with that. SRG have a standard naming convention for their teams. So any teams which don't follow that naming convention are flagged here, and then they can just be renamed and corrected. And we have teams with many channels. So again, you know, a bit like the private channel, similar to that. If a team has many channels, then maybe that would be better broken up into multiple teams, or perhaps there are some channels in there which would be better off archived, and we need to do a bit of housekeeping in there. Obviously different checks for the different tiles, but yeah, similar idea. Just each tile will show the key governance decisions for each of those services. We'll probably extend those tiles or the dashboards longer term as new features are added, but for now, that seems to cover everything off. So the final step or stage in the deployment was to look at automation. So we created the dashboards. The dashboards were in use. They were starting to add some value. So then we're looking at of those checks that we've created and we're now using the dashboards. Can we add any automation to those? Now, the automation would be can be one of two things. One is can we do some sort of automated activity based on a check being based on a check being violated? So can we manage an outcome? If this happens, then automatically do this. The other option is to send a message or an alert when a check is violated, just to save somebody from having to come to the dashboard and sort of view that information manually. Now there are currently 5 triggers in Rencore for automation. So sorry, not 5 triggers, 5 actions that can be used for automation. So one is to send a message to a Teams channel. So send something directly into the conversation feed of a team. Send an email to somebody. We can set the visibility of a group to public or private. That's obviously very specific and is used in, you know, in that scenario when you need to amend the permissions for a group or a team. We can send an HTTP request, so we can actually go off and trigger an action in another cloud-based platform, or, you know, anything that can receive HTTP requests. Or finally, for the more advanced or I guess bespoke options, we can trigger an Azure function as well. For the purpose of SRG's needs at the minute, it turned out that actually we were just going to use the simple send an email action for now. When it comes to using that action, it's a nice simple process to go through. You receive an email template you build the email template through the GUI. This example here is for the check where licenses are running low. So if licenses drop, if the number of available licenses for a particular SKU drops below 5, send this email. So you can see here, as part of building out the template, we can pull through some of the information that's available in Rencore governance. So here we can say, you know, Microsoft 365 license E3s are running low, and include that in the body of the email, and also how many unused units are available. And then that allows Greg and his team to make a choice on whether they should be ordering any more. So this is the very basic flow of how it is at the moment. On violation of low license check, send an email to IT. What we are looking at doing now, which is more of a proof of concept, is to extend that out and actually use the HTTP request option. So what we'll do is, with the same check, when licenses run low, we're going to send an HTTP request to Power Automate. Now that's going to trigger a flow which will contact IT. It will let them know which licenses are low. It will ask them if they would like to reorder, and if they do want to reorder, how many additional licenses they want. It will then go off and place that order with their license provider for the additional licenses. So it just adds that little bit more automation to what we've already created. So in summary, so just to look at the process we went through with Specialist Risk Group, we started off with governance planning, and that was quite a while ago, and that was related to the overall planning and strategy of the rollout of Microsoft 365 services. We then reviewed the product capabilities and some potential use cases with SRG and the stakeholders within SRG, and then decided to break it down, the deployment down, into a 3-stage process, where we looked at some of the kind of quick wins or the general governance of the tenant, identities, licenses, security, etc., and we built some dashboards around that. We then moved into building a dashboard around specific services in Microsoft 365 and aligned the governance decisions that had been made to the checks that we added in there. And then we added some simple automation on at the end, which will be extended. I'm sure it will be extended quite a lot actually, but will be extended shortly just to include that proof of concept that we talked about. And just to wrap up, I think Greg's now just going to talk through a couple of the benefits that SRG are now seeing from their use of Rencore governance.
Thanks, Alex. I mean, I think the points here are pretty self-explanatory on the screen. Rencore allows us to see all this useful information in one portal, having visibility to review any problematic or potential problematic activity. It allows us to learn where we can improve the housekeeping and internal processes for the business, along with helping us to understand how the employees are using the services and if there are any key areas that we need to provide support on, really. Back to you, Alex.
I think that's it. We're wrapped up. Is there any questions that need to be answered? Because
yes, there certainly is, Alex. There were a few questions that have come in. I did decide to save them all until the end. And some of these are certainly relevant to what you were saying as you were going along. So we'll just start from the first one that came in, and I'll just go down the list. First one being, what other tools, approaches did you evaluate before deciding for using Rencore?
We really just looked at the various admin centers within Microsoft 365, and also the ability to add admin alerts, through those admin centers as well. I know that other people have looked at the other companies who are using Power Automate and Power Apps to a much higher degree, have assessed the center of excellence against Rencore. That's not something we have to do here because the use of those particular services is pretty low at the minute in SRG. So yeah, we really just assessed the out of the box Microsoft 365 auditing and alerting capabilities.
Perfect, thanks. Then going on to the next question, which is who or which functions in your organization are using the tool or data provided by the tool? Is it, for instance, only admins? So who?
I'll take that one.
Yeah, sure.
At the moment, it's just us in IT. The admins looking after this and reviewing this as we're going along. We are still obviously learning as we're going along with Rencore and Yoko helping us along the way. And as we start to develop a bit more of an understanding of that, then we can start to possibly look to move that to other parts of the business that could use Rencore for other things.
Okay, so you'll be rolling it out to other parts of the business, and obviously there is the new role management that we've recently introduced within Rencore, and I'm sure that will become useful for you guys as well as you do that. And then moving on to the next question, which is, how frequent do you review and update your governance policies? Is it set and you forget about it, or does it require frequent tweaking? I think possibly for Greg or Alex. Yeah, go.
Well, certainly from the involvement we've had, we kind of set quite a detailed and structured governance plan right at the start. There were some delays due to the onboarding of mailboxes, etc., to the actual rollout of the collaboration side of things, where I guess there was more governance involved. So what happened was there was a review when the governance there was a review of the governance when those additional services started to be rolled out, and then there was another review when we came to deploy Rencore. So yeah, it's certainly not fixed in stone, but it's not a regular review unless there are some significant new features that come out, which obviously requires some governance decisions to support them.
And something Greg mentioned was acquisitions. SRG is kind of frequently acquiring other companies. Does that kind of was that a point in time when you do tweaking, or not really? I mean, how would you bring them?
I guess yes, we could look to, dependent on the acquisition, I suppose. a lot of the time we are kind of lift and shift with these acquisitions into the group as they are. But if there is any reason for us to need to tweak them, then yeah, there is that ability to do that. I can't say we've had to do that yet, but you know, who knows with these acquisitions? Every single one is different.
Okay, absolutely. All right, thanks. And then the next question: how long did it take you to define your initial governance plan and then set it up? And then set up the dashboards and policies in the tool? Was that a long process? How long did it take?
Again, I think I was working on that with somebody else within Greg's team. So the actual defining the governance was well, it was a relatively short project, I guess, in the scale of things. So it was a time box project in its own right. Over elapsed time, you know, it might be a couple of weeks with doing the workshops, reviewing the documents, finalising the decisions and so on. So it wasn't a significant piece of work, but then there was certainly a period of time that passed before we set up Renco. But to do all the Renco configuration, you know, it's not a big piece of work. You saw me build that dashboard, you know, in very little time. Yeah. So once you get a feel for it, once you understand how it all works and how it fits together and the relationships, and you understand how you want to link the information that's coming back to build your checks, you know, you can build a whole set of dashboards in a number of days.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And to the next question, most of this information is accessible from the admin centers or via the API. Did you consider building your own solution scripts instead of using a tool like Rencore? And I don't know who wants to take that one. I know, Greg, you did mention all in one portal in your summary there, but yeah, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that one. In short, the answer is no. And that's purely because if I'm being selfish and looking at the team that we are in SRG, we're a very small team, and for us to go down the route of trying to, you know, build our own solutions, scripts, etc., it just didn't really make a lot of sense for us. I mean, could be there for someone else out there, but you know, for us, it just made complete sense coming to Rencore. And as you mentioned there, Charles, you know, one portal is very simple. Everything's in one place. It just makes our life a lot easier.
Okay, so it wasn't practical or feasible for it to be done on your own. Okay,
exactly that.
Perfect. All right, thanks. And then the next question, is Rencore something that is installed or is it a SaaS? I think I can quickly answer that question. So Rencore, the way we market ourselves is as a SaaS solution. It is hosted in Rencore's Azure subscription, but we do have a self-hosting version as well of the tool. But of course, licensing with that changes, and there are some fees you have to pay additionally, because as you can imagine, whenever we roll out an upgrade, we have to do that for you individually. Whenever there's a problem, we can't just make a hot fix and roll it out to everybody, and we have to do that with you individually. So yes, self-hosting is an option, but otherwise, yes, it is hosted in Rencore's Azure subscription as a SaaS. And then the next one, is it possible to try out Rencore governance? Yes, absolutely. You can simply go to our website, the Rencore website, and within that you can try out the Rencore governance tool. You'll be enrolled into a 30-day trial, and you can use our demo data if you just want to click around through it, or even better, if you did want to connect initially, if it's your test tenant, if you're scared of taking this straight to your production tenant, then test it on a test tenant to get a better flavor for the tool, and then from there you can move it on to the production tool. And then another question, which I guess is for me as well, is how is the tool licensed? Is it per user? So yes, the tool is licensed per tenant, per user. And when we say user, what we mean is every account that is active and enabled, and the account has a Microsoft 365 or Office 365 license. So if any of those conditions aren't met, then it's not a user, and they won't be counted external users, so on and so forth, and not counted in the licensing. And then moving on to is this the final question? Yes, this is the final question. As a partner, is it possible to reuse a governance plan implemented in the tool and build a repeatable offering around this? So that's actually coming, well, it sounds as though somebody who's interested in becoming a partner. But as a partner, Alex, I will leave that one to you. Is this something which is possible to reuse as a governance plan? Or what would you say?
Yeah, I'd say obviously the governance planning really has got nothing to do with Rencore. That's just something you should be doing anyway as part of Microsoft 365. And if you've got an approach to do that, you'll find that you're having the same conversations and often coming up with the same decisions a lot of the time anyway. So that's that kind of separate, and the answer would be yes for that. All of the dashboards, all of the checks can be exported from Rencore, from one client environment and then imported into another. So yes, you can build up a portfolio if you want, if that's the right word, of checks and dashboards, which you can then add to any customer environment and tweak as necessary. So it's very much a repeatable process.
And so was there anything there that you did, for instance, for SRG specific to the insurance industry, or could that, for instance, be rolled out to somebody else within another sector, just as an example?
Yeah, I don't see many of these governance conversations flagging many sector-specific requirements. Yes, they will come up from time to time, but it's being used. It's the tool used by information workers most of the time. So a lot of the requirements or the governance decisions don't relate really to a specific sector. So it means the work you do in Rencore generally will be usable across all the different sectors you may work with.
All right, perfect. That is the end of the questions, and I guess the end of the webinar. Was there any last words from either Greg or Alex?
I think maybe just a thank you to you guys for inviting us on to.
Thank you for attending.
Join you on this demo, and yeah.
Thank you very much for taking part in the webinar. All right, thanks everybody. That's a wrap. Thank you.